Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a genuinely fascinating journey. We're going to track the absolute revolution in forensic science. We're talking about moving from the primitive, honestly kind of frustrating days of 20th century crime solving, right up to the breathtaking genetic mastery we have today. It's a story of stolen identities, relentless citizen sleuths, and how the secrets hidden inside our very cells are literally rewriting history. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. I want you to consider a haunting epitaph engraved on a gray headstone in Georgetown, Kentucky. It was put up in 1971 for a young woman who was found wrapped in a green canvas tarpaulin just off Route 25. For 3 decades, 30 whole years, the town cared for this grave. They left flowers for a complete stranger they just called the tent girl.
And, it forces us to ask a deeply provocative question. What actually happens when a victim has no name? Think about the sheer tragedy of these unsolvable Jane and John Does buried decades ago. They basically become ghosts of the interstate. A stolen identity leaves families completely frozen in this agonizing uncertainty. And worse, it allows the people responsible to just walk away, totally confident that their secrets are buried forever.
So moving into Section 1, the era of nameless victims and the limits of 20th century forensics. Back in the mid-20th century, if a body was found across state lines, away from home, it was almost always an absolutely insurmountable puzzle for local detectives.
And looking at the history here brilliantly illustrates the immense challenges they faced. The obstacles detectives were up against were truly daunting. Imagine being a local sheriff armed with little more than primitive police sketches and frankly unreliable visual bone estimates to identify remains in advanced stages of decomposition. Add to that transient victims, a total lack of centralized national databases, and killers who frequently cross state lines, you start to see why cases went cold literally the very moment they were opened.
Actually, early anthropological misclassification often created absolute tunnel vision. Take the case of Penny Doe, who was found in a drainage ditch in Eaton, Ohio, back in 1968. Get this, for over 50 years, investigators searched for a missing 30 to 50-year-old woman based entirely on initial coroner estimates. It wasn't until modern laboratory analysis and Y-DNA testing in 2023 that they realized the victim was actually a biological male. His real name was Albert Allen Frost, so a simple visual misclassification kept his family completely in the dark for half a century.
Now for Section 2, the citizen sleuth revolution and the dawn of the internet. Because where science failed, human obsession stepped in. Let's shift our narrative to the real human heroes of our explainer, the ordinary people who flat out refuse to let these cases stay cold.
The crazy thing is, this search started entirely analog. In the late 1980s, a guy named Todd Matthews heard the tent girl story from his father-in-law, Wilbur Riddle. Now, Wilbur was actually the man who discovered her body back in 1968. Well, Matthews became completely fixated. He spent years just combing through physical newspaper archives, making endless phone calls. But then, the internet dawned. Matthews launched a tent girl website in 1997, and just a year later, while scrolling through an early missing persons web board, he found a post from a woman in Arkansas looking for her sister who went missing from Kentucky in 1967. The description, right down to a specific gap in her front teeth, was a perfect match.
That breakthrough absolutely changed everything. Matthews' persistence basically birthed what we now know as the Doe Network. If you haven't heard of it, it's a volunteer-driven global database that utilizes the collective power of the internet to match missing person reports with unidentified remains. Citizen sleuths completely democratized missing persons investigations. They proved that anyone, literally anyone with an internet connection and a refusal to look away, could help restore a name.
Which brings us to Section 3, the power of DNA and unlocking biological vaults. Finding a possible match online was amazing, but it was really only half the battle. Science actually had to prove it. So to prove the tent girl's identity in 1998, they had to somehow miraculously extract DNA from remains that had been buried in the ground for 30 years. Here's how they did it. First, the remains were exhumed. Forensic scientists then zeroed right in on her teeth. You see, the hard enamel of our teeth acts like a biological safe room, shielding the pulp inside from environmental decay. So they cleaned away the mineral deposits, ground a tooth into a superfine powder, and isolated the DNA from that protected pulp. And it was a flawless success.
So the crucial point is understanding the massive evolutionary leap in how we actually process that DNA. Back when the tent girl was identified, they used what's called STR profiling. That required a direct one-to-one comparison. In her case, a cheek swab from her sister. But today we use SNP profiling.
This scans hundreds of thousands of genetic markers, allowing investigators to build massive family trees using distant cousins, fourth cousins, fifth cousins. It completely opens the doors to solving cases where no immediate family is available to test. It's a real game changer.
Let's look at Section 4, Restoring Stolen Identities and the Redhead Murders. This brings us directly to how this new DNA mastery is finally closing the books on some of America's most infamous regional serial cases.
14. That is the staggering potential upper limit of victims in what the media dubbed the Redhead Murders. This was a completely horrific series of unsolved highway killings across the Bible Belt. We're talking Tennessee, Arkansas, Kentucky, Mississippi, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, happening between 1978 and 1992. The victims were often young women with reddish hair just abandoned along major interstates. And for decades, they were just nameless Jane Does.
Now, what's truly incredible when we look at these resolved cases is seeing the sheer volume of restorative justice happening right now. It is absolutely staggering. The Campbell County Jane Doe, found in 1985, she became Tina Marie Farmer in 2018. The Knox County Jane Doe, who was tragically found in a discarded refrigerator, restored as SP Pilgrim in 2018. The Cheatham County Jane Doe, she finally became Michelle Lavone Inman in 2023. These women were cruelly stripped of their identities by a killer, but genetic genealogy has systematically returned their real names to their families.
Moving into Section 5, Catching Cold Case Killers and Posthumous Justice, because identifying the victims is really only the first step. What happens when we take this incredible science and turn it toward the perpetrators?
Well, for a long time, predators like Thomas Collier Jordan thought they had beaten the system. Jordan brutally attacked 2 women in Ohio back in 1987. He fled the state, moved out to Arizona, and eventually died under hospice care in 2009, taking his black secrets to a barren desert grave. He genuinely thought he won. But modern science exhumed his crimes. In 2022, DNA testing linked his profile to both attacks, which actually prompted investigators to dig up his body just to confirm the match. And BCI investigators in Ohio didn't just have DNA. They had a chilling, highly specific modus operandi that linked his crimes. In those 1987 attacks on Janice Christensen and Michelle Pewitt Howard, both women were on walking trails. Both were bound by shoelaces. A knife was utilized, and the victim's car keys were stolen from the scene. The technology finally caught up to the behavioral evidence, slamming the book completely shut on a monster 37 years later.
Connecting right back to our tent girl, her identity was restored as Barbara Ann Hackman Taylor. It turns out her husband, George Earl Taylor, who was a traveling carnival worker, leveraged the 1960s stigma of abandonment. When she disappeared, he just casually told people she ran off with another man. And because nobody filed a missing persons report, he completely masked his crime and evaded a courtroom, eventually dying of cancer in 1987. He might have avoided prison, but science made absolutely sure he couldn't erase her from history.
There's a powerful quote from Shelby Police Detective Adam Turner that really hits the nail on the head. He stated, "Our ancestors, our lineage back through time are our roots to this earth, and when someone's missing in that chain, that leaves a void that cannot be filled." Time doesn't diminish the value of a human life. The 50 years that Albert Frost, or the 30 years that Barbara Taylor went unidentified, well, that didn't make their lives any less worthy of an answer.
Which leaves us with this final, genuinely provocative thought. How many more mysteries are currently sitting in evidence lockers just waiting to be solved by the next massive leap in technology? Going from anonymous green tarps to pinpoint genetic genealogy proves that, honestly, no secret is truly safe forever. As long as we have citizen sleuths, dedicated detectives, and advancing science, the truth will always find a way to the surface. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.